In the year 1776, while nations were busy drawing borders and declaring independence, something quiet began in the sky, something no one noticed. Telescopes pointed upward saw only stars, planets, and the endless dark. But out there, far beyond what any human eye could see, a signal had been sent. Not from Earth, from somewhere else. It traveled through dust, gas, and time itself. Moving at the speed of light, steady and patient. Back on Earth, people were lighting candles, writing letters by hand, and wondering if lightning was magic or science. No one had radios. No one knew what a signal from space even meant. So when that message arrived, soft, coded, repeating, it washed over the planet like a silent wave. Nothing happened. No alarms rang. No scientists jumped up from their desks. Humanity didn't hear it. Not because it wasn't there, but because they simply didn't have the ears to listen. For decades, then centuries, life went on. Wars flared and faded. Empires rose and crumbled. Trains replaced horses. Light bulbs replaced oil lamps. And still, that signal kept coming. Every 23 hours and 17 minutes, like clockwork, it pulsed through the void. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was more like a whisper. Are you there? But Earth remained silent, not out of fear, not out of arrogance, just silence. Because for a long time, humans didn't even know someone or something was calling. Then, in the early 1900s, everything changed. A curious mind tinkered with wires and coils in a small lab. He wasn't looking for aliens. He was just trying to send voices across oceans without strings. But his machine picked up something strange, a steady rhythmic hum that didn't match thunderstorms or machinery. He wrote it off as interference. Still, he noted it in his journal, odd pulse, regular, unnatural. That note was forgotten for nearly 50 years. It wasn't until the 1960s, when giant radio dishes dotted the countryside like silver flowers, that someone finally paid attention. A young researcher, tired and working late, saw a pattern on a printout that made her freeze. The same pulse, the same timing, coming from the same patch of sky. She ran the numbers again, then again. Her hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of a single thought. We're not alone. She told her team. They checked, double-checked, triple-checked. No satellite. No military test. No glitch. Just a signal, clean, deliberate. Repeating. The world didn't erupt in panic. There were no headlines screaming aliens. Not yet. Scientists kept it quiet, studying it in hushed tones, afraid of sounding foolish. But inside observatories and university labs, hearts beat faster. Coffee went cold. Sleep was lost. Because for the first time in human history, someone had proof that intelligence existed beyond Earth. And yet, they said nothing back. Why? Because no one could agree on what to say or whether they should say anything at all. Some argued it was too dangerous. Others said it was our duty to reach out. Governments debated in secret rooms. Philosophers wrote essays. Religious leaders prayed. But the public? Most didn't even know. The signal stayed hidden in scientific journals, buried under technical jargon. So the silence continued. 20 years passed. Then 30. The signal never stopped. It became part of the background noise of the cosmos, like the hum of a refrigerator you stop noticing after a while. New generations grew up never knowing it existed. Space agencies focused on Mars, on asteroids, on building stations in orbit. The signal? It was just there. Like gravity, like starlight. But in 2003, something shifted. A retired engineer living in a quiet coastal town built a small radio telescope in his backyard, not for fame, not for money, just because he loved the stars. One rainy night, while calibrating his dish, he caught the signal himself. Clear as a bell. He recorded it, shared it online. And this time, the internet did what governments wouldn't. It spread the truth. Within days, millions had heard the audio file, a soft rhythmic beep, repeating every 23 hours and 17 minutes. People slowed down, looked up, wondered. Memes were made, yes, but so were poems, songs, paintings. For the first time, the average person felt the weight of that cosmic question. Are we being watched? Are we being waited for? Still, no official reply came. The United Nations formed a committee. Experts debated ethics, risks, language. Should we send math, music, a photo of Earth? Or just say, hello? Years slipped by in meetings and white papers. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers around the world began pointing their own antennas toward the source, sending simple pulses of their own uncoordinated, helpful, human. Most of those messages vanished into the dark. The one was different. In 2025, a global network of citizen scientists synchronized their transmissions. On a clear winter night, thousands of small dishes from Norway to New Zealand fired a single, unified response into the sky. Not a demand, not a threat. Just three things: the sound of a heartbeat, the frequency of hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, and a child's voice saying, "We're here." It took 127 years for that reply to reach its destination. And for the next 123 years, Earth waited. Nothing came back. No flash, no new signal, no sign they'd been heard. Doubt crept in. Maybe the original message was a natural phenomenon after all. Maybe the senders were gone. Maybe they chose not to answer. Humanity almost gave up. But then on a Tuesday morning in February 2026, everything changed. Deep in a remote desert observatory, an automated system flagged an anomaly. Not a repeat of the old signal. Something new, stronger, closer, and embedded within it. Patterns, shapes, meaning. It wasn't just a reply. It was a conversation starter. And this time, humanity wouldn't stay silent, because after 250 years of waiting, listening, doubting, and hoping, they finally understood. The universe wasn't asking if we existed, that it was asking if we were ready. The message didn't arrive with fanfare. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just a quiet ping in a server room buried under layers of rock and silence, designed to shield it from Earth's own noise. At first, the system flagged it as interference, maybe a satellite glitch, maybe solar static. But the pattern was too clean, too deliberate. Within minutes, alerts rippled through secure channels. Not to newsrooms or social media, but to a small group of people who'd spent their lives watching the sky, waiting for this exact moment. Some were retired. Some were still teaching students how to listen to the stars. One was fixing a leaky faucet in her kitchen when her old, government-issued phone buzzed with a code she hadn't seen in 20 years. She froze, then dropped the wrench. By noon, they were all online, voices hushed but urgent. The new signal wasn't just a reply, it was layered. Buried inside the radio waves were mathematical sequences, geometric shapes, even what looked like chemical formulas. But the most startling part? It included echoes of the message humanity had sent back in 2025. The heartbeat, the hydrogen frequency, even fragments of that child's voice. They'd heard, and they'd remembered. But here's what no one expected. The message wasn't coming from where the original signal had originated. It was closer, much closer. So close, in fact, that it couldn't be a coincidence. Panic didn't spread, not yet. Instead, a strange calm settled over those who knew. Because if someone had traveled across light years to get nearer, They weren't just curious. They were committed. Governments scrambled quietly. Emergency protocols long forgotten were dusted off. But this time, secrecy wasn't an option. Too many eyes were already watching. Amateur astronomers, university labs, even hobbyists with backyard antennas. They'd all caught the anomaly. Within hours, rumors exploded online. They're here. First contact is happening. It's a hoax. The noise was deafening. Yet amid the chaos, something beautiful happened. People stopped arguing about politics, borders, or beliefs. For one night, millions stepped outside. Looked up, not with fear, but with wonder. Parents pointed to the sky and told their kids. Something amazing might be happening. Strangers nodded at each other in the street, like they shared a secret. Scientists worked around the clock, decoding layer after layer. The message wasn't just data, it was a kind of invitation. Embedded in the patterns was a star map. Not of distant galaxies, but of our own cosmic neighborhood. And one point glowed brighter than the rest. A spot just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Empty space, according to every chart ever made. Except now, it wasn't empty. Radar scans confirmed it. Something was there. Not a ship at least, not in any shape humans recognized. More like a structure. Silent, smooth, reflecting sunlight in odd rhythmic pulses. It hadn't been there a week ago. It didn't move, it just waited. The world held its breath. No one attacked it. No missiles were launched. In a rare moment of unity, every major space agency agreed. Observe. Listen. Don't provoke. A joint mission was fast-tracked, not to destroy, but to understand. Engineers repurposed deep space probes, rerouting them toward the object. It would take months to get close enough to see clearly, but every day brought new data. Meanwhile, the signal kept playing, not repeating the same loop, but evolving, adding new elements. Sometimes it sounded like wind through trees. Other times, like water dripping in a cave. Once, it carried a melody so simple and haunting that a musician in Oslo wept when she transcribed it. People began to realize this wasn't just communication. It was an attempt to connect. To speak in a language beyond words, using things all living beings understand. Rhythm, pattern, harmony. Schools started lessons on cosmic empathy. Artists painted what they imagined the senders might look like, not monsters. Not gods, but fellow travelers in a vast, lonely universe. Philosophers asked, what does it mean to be human when we're no longer alone? And ordinary folks? They talked. On buses, in cafes, in late-night texts to friends. Not about invasion or doom, but about hope. About whether kindness could cross the stars. About whether we'd finally grown up enough to meet others without fear. Then, 3 weeks after the signal changed, something unexpected happened on Earth. All over the planet, people reported the same dream. Not identical, but similar enough to be uncanny. A feeling of floating. A soft light. A sense of being gently watched, not judged. Seen. Scientists dismissed it as mass hysteria. But those who'd had the dream didn't care. They said it felt real. Like a handshake across the dark. Back at the observatories, the data kept coming. The object near Neptune wasn't just sitting there. It was emitting tiny pulses of energy, harmless, rhythmic, matching the heartbeat humans had sent decades ago. As if to say, we remember you. We're still listening. No one knew what would happen next. Would they come closer? Would they speak in words? Would they wait forever? But one thing was certain. Humanity's silence was over. Not because they shouted into the void, but because they finally understood that listening is also a form of speaking. And for the first time in 250 years, Earth wasn't just receiving a message. It was part of a conversation. The world didn't change overnight, but it began to breathe differently. After weeks of watching the silent object beyond Neptune, something shifted inside people. Not in governments or labs, but in homes, streets, and quiet moments before sleep. The fear that had once lived in the back of everyone's mind, the idea that space was empty and we were alone, had vanished. In its place grew a strange, soft certainty. We are seen. That feeling changed everything. Crime rates didn't drop to zero. Wars didn't magically end. But small things started happening. Things no one could explain with data. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years shared tools over fences. Strangers helped each other carry groceries without being asked. In cities where people used to rush past each other with eyes down, more faces looked up, smiled, said, "Good morning." It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Scientists called it the quiet effect. Others just said, "It's like we remembered how to be human." Meanwhile, the object near Neptune remained still but not silent. Every 23 hours and 17 minutes, just like the original signal, it pulsed a gentle wave of energy, harmless, measurable, familiar. Every time it did, radio telescopes around the world picked up something new hidden inside. A tone, a shape, a sequence. Not instructions, not demands, more like gifts. One day, it sent the mathematical pattern of a snowflake. Another, the vibration frequency of a honeybee's wing. Once, it transmitted the exact rhythm of ocean waves hitting a shore in New Zealand recorded decades ago by a forgotten research buoy. How did they know? No one could say. But the message was clear. We've been listening too. That realization hit hard. For 250 years, humanity thought they were the ones waiting. But maybe they weren't. Maybe someone had been watching Earth all along, not to invade, not to judge, but to understand. To learn when the right moment would come. And now, that moment was here. Space agencies from every continent joined forces, not out of politics, but necessity. They launched a small, unarmed probe toward the object. No weapons, no aggressive scans. Just cameras, microphones, and sensors tuned to listen, not interrogate. The mission was named Whisper, and its only rule was, do no harm. As the probe traveled, Earth held a kind of global vigil. Schools paused lessons to watch live updates. Factories played mission audio over lunch breaks. Even in remote villages with no internet, people gathered around radios, listening to crackling reports of the journey. It wasn't about technology anymore. It was about shared hope. Back on the ground, artists began responding in their own way. A dancer in Mumbai choreographed a piece using only breath and silence, mimicking the pulse of the signal. A group of children in Chile painted a mural of Earth reaching out with open hands, not fists. Musicians blended whale songs, wind chimes, and old lullabies into a single track they beamed into space every night. No one told them to. They just felt like it mattered. Then, something unexpected happened with the probe. 2 days before, it was set to reach the object. Its instruments detected a change. The structure wasn't solid metal or rock. It shimmered slightly like heat haze over desert sand. And as the probe got closer, it began to respond. Not with sound, but with light. Soft, shifting colors that matched no known spectrum. Scientists couldn't explain it. But when they converted the light patterns into sound, it formed a melody eerily similar to the one heard weeks earlier in Oslo. The probe slowed, automatically, as if guided by an invisible hand. It didn't crash. It didn't bounce off. It simply settled beside the object, floating like a leaf on calm water. And then, for the first time, the object spoke in something close to words. Not English. Not any human language. But through layered tones and pulses, it formed concepts humans could almost grasp. One phrase repeated again and again. Translated slowly by teams working in shifts across time zones. You are ready. Not, we are here. Not, take us to your leader. Just, you are ready. The words echoed through newsrooms, classrooms, living rooms. People cried. Not from fear, but from relief. Like a child finally hearing a parent say, I'm proud of you. But what did it mean? Ready for what? That question hung in the air like mist. Some thought it meant humanity had passed a test proving we could choose curiosity over fear, kindness over control. Others believed it was an invitation to join something larger, a network of civilizations, quietly sharing knowledge across the stars. A few worried it was a warning that being ready meant facing truths we weren't prepared for. Yet no matter the theory, one thing united everyone. The silence was truly over. Now came the harder part, not just listening, but answering well. Governments proposed sending diplomats into space. Scientists argued for more data. Religious leaders spoke of grace and humility. But in the end, the decision wasn't made in boardrooms. It was made by ordinary people. Through a global online vote open to anyone with internet access, humanity chose how to respond. Not with politics, not with power, but with poetry. They sent back three things. First, a recording of rain falling on leaves in the Amazon. Second, the sound of a grandmother humming to her grandchild. Third, a single sentence spoken in every major language on Earth, overlapping like a choir. We are learning. Please teach us. The message launched from dozens of antennas at once, aimed not just at the object near Neptune, but into the deeper sky toward the original source, wherever it was. And then, they waited. Not with dread, not with impatience, but with open hands and open hearts. Because after 250 years of silence, humanity had finally learned the most important lesson. Connection isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about listening deeply and replying with truth. The waiting after sending that message, we are learning. Please teach us, felt different. Before, silence meant loneliness. Now, it felt like holding your breath before a friend speaks. People didn't panic. They gathered. In parks, on rooftops, in living rooms with curtains pulled back to see the stars. They shared stories. Not about aliens, but about hope. A baker in Lisbon started making star-shaped bread. Kids in Nairobi drew pictures of what learning from the stars might look like, mostly colorful swirls and smiling suns. Then, the object moved. Not fast. Not toward Earth. But it shifted its position near Neptune, turning slowly, like someone sitting up to pay attention. Telescopes caught it. The change was tiny, less than the width of a hair held at arm's length, but it was deliberate. And when it turned, it pulsed. Not the old 23-hour rhythm, but something new, a steady, calming beat. Like a heartbeat. Scientists called it the greeting pulse. Ordinary people just felt it. In cities, traffic seemed quieter. In hospitals, patients reported less pain. No one could prove it was the pulse, but everyone knew. It was like the universe had taken a deep breath with us. The real magic happened on the ground. A farmer in Iowa noticed his crops growing stronger, healthier. Neighbors laughed it off until their fields did the same. Doctors in Tokyo saw fewer stress-related illnesses. Teachers in Rio reported kids listening more, arguing less. It wasn't magic. It was connection. People stopped seeing strangers as threats. When a bus broke down in Mumbai, passengers didn't curse. They shared water, told jokes, helped push it to the next stop. We're all waiting together, one man said, wiping sweat. Might as well be kind. Even the internet changed. Memes weren't about tearing people down anymore. They were about wonder. Me staring at Neptune like, you got my text? Or, when the universe says, I see you, and you finally believe it. Arguments didn't vanish. but they softened. Online fights about politics or sports would pause when someone posted, "Remember the heartbeat pulse? We're bigger than this." Then came the dreams that not just a few people this time, millions, all over the world. The same gentle feeling, floating in warm, starlit water. A sense of being understood. Not judged for our wars or waste, but seen for our trying. A grandmother in Kenya woke up humming a tune she'd never heard later. Scientists matched it to the object's new pulse pattern. A teenager in Canada sketched a dream upon waking. A simple circle, glowing softly, with Earth inside it. When he posted it online, 200,000 people commented, "I saw this too." Governments still met in secret, but the secrecy felt pointless now. People knew. Not the details, but the truth. Something kind was out there. And it was changing us. One rainy Tuesday, the object did something unexpected. It projected light. Not into space, but onto Earth. Just for a few minutes. A soft silver glow appeared in the night sky over every major city. No sound, no words. Just light, shifting like northern lights, but warmer. In London, it pooled in the Thames like liquid starlight. In Bangkok, it danced on temple roofs. People ran outside, phones forgotten, faces upturned. No one screamed. No one ran. They just stood, hand in hand. Strangers sharing umbrellas. Kids pointing. Elders weeping quietly. A fisherman in Norway watched it ripple on the sea. "It's not scary," he told his grandson later. "It's like the ocean saying, 'Hello.'" That night, something shifted inside humanity. Not all at once, but like a tide turning. Factories that once made weapons began designing tools for space exploration, solar sails, clean energy systems, even new medicines inspired by the object's light patterns. A former arms dealer in Germany converted his warehouse into a community garden. "We don't need walls anymore," he said, planting tomatoes. "We need roots." Schools scrapped old curriculums. Lessons weren't just about math or history, they were about care. How to grow food. How to listen. How to fix things without throwing them away. A teacher in Mexico put it simply, "We're teaching kids to be good neighbors to Earth, and maybe to others." The biggest change? People started trusting each other again. In refugee camps, aid workers noticed something strange. People who'd been enemies back home, different tribes, religions, languages, were sharing food, building shelters together. "We're all strangers here," one woman said, handing a blanket to a former rival. "But we're not alone anymore." In a Detroit neighborhood once divided by gang lines, teens painted a mural across both sides of the street, Earth cradled in open hands, with the words, "We are learning," in 10 languages. Scientists still studied the object, of course. They learned it wasn't a ship. It was a library, or a classroom. Buried in its signals were lessons not about technology, but about living. One sequence showed how to purify water using only sunlight and clay. Another revealed how trees communicate underground. A third taught a meditation rhythm that reduced anxiety in 90% of test subjects. It wasn't alien science. It was wisdom we'd forgotten. But the most important lesson came quietly. One morning, the object pulsed a new pattern. Simple, familiar. It matched the sound of wind through bamboo forests in Vietnam, recorded decades ago by a scientist who'd since passed away. Her family heard it on the radio and wept. They'd never shared those recordings publicly. How did they know? Then it hit people. They'd been listening to everything. Not just our signals, but our whispers. Our laughter. Our tears. The way a mother soothes a baby at 3 a.m. The sound of hands clapping after a child's first step. They weren't studying us like lab rats. They were witnessing us. A janitor in Chicago put it best. They see the good we hide from ourselves. This changed how people moved through the world. No more hiding kindness. A businessman in Seoul started leaving extra food outside his office for homeless neighbors. Before, I'd worry about looking weak, he admitted. Now, I want them to know we see you too. In a crowded Tokyo train, a young man gave his seat to an elderly woman, not out of duty, but joy. The stars are watching us be good, he smiled. Let's give them a show. Even the skeptics softened. The ones who called it a hoax, a government trick, they still had questions. But now they asked gently, how do we deserve this? Instead of, what's the catch? Then, after 47 days of waiting, the reply came. Not through telescopes. Not through radio waves, not through the dreams. Millions woke at the same moment, 3:17 a.m. everywhere. Not with images, but with understanding. Like a thought placed gently in the mind. You have always been part of the story. Now you know. No grand reveal. No spaceship landing. Just that quiet certainty settling into bones and breath. The next morning, the object began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming transparent, like ice melting into water. It wasn't leaving. It was becoming part of the sky. A new constellation, visible only at dawn. People didn't mourn. They felt ready, because the real shift wasn't out there. It was here. In the way a nurse in Cairo held a patient's hand a little longer. In the way kids in Brazil shared their last piece of fruit. In the way the whole planet finally understood. We were never silent. We were just learning how to speak. And now, we had so much to say. The morning after the dreams came, the world didn't wake up to fireworks or flying ships. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels full, like the space between heartbeats. People stepped outside and looked up not with fear, but with a soft curiosity, like greeting an old friend you hadn't seen in years. The sky was the same blue, the sun the same warmth. But everything felt lighter. Like a weight everyone had carried without knowing it was there had finally lifted. In a small coastal town, a fisherman mended his nets while his grandson watched the sea. They weren't watching to judge us, were they? The boy asked, skipping a stone. The old man shook his head, hands steady. No, they were waiting to see if we'd remember how to be gentle with each other. The boy nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Nearby, a woman hung laundry, humming the dream melody. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was in the way she moved, slow and sure, like she had all the time in the world. That's what changed first. Time. People stopped rushing. At bus stops, strangers shared stories instead of staring at phones. In markets, buyers lingered to ask how the farmer's family was. A barista in a busy city started writing, "You matter" on coffee cups, not as a gimmick, but because she meant it. Before, she'd say later, I handed out drinks like they were tickets. Now, I see the person holding the cup. The constellation, the one formed from the fading object, became a daily ritual. Every dawn, people stepped outside to watch it. Not for answers, but for company. In Tokyo, office workers paused on rooftops. In Nairobi, kids pointed while walking to school. It wasn't worship. It was like sharing sunrise with a quiet neighbor. It reminds us we're part of something bigger, said a teacher in Buenos Aires, her classroom windows always open to the east. Not smaller, bigger. Science kept working, but differently. No more frantic decoding. Researchers treated the signals like letters from a pen pal. When a new pattern arrived, a sequence mimicking bird migration, they didn't just analyze it. They followed it. Biologists tracked real birds, matching their flight paths to the signal's rhythm. Farmers used it to plant crops. In India, a village adjusted their harvest dates based on the pattern and got their best yield in decades. The sky isn't giving us tools, an elder there said, rubbing soil between his fingers. It's reminding us how to listen to the earth. But the deepest shifts happened in the spaces between words. In a hospital waiting room, Two strangers sat side by side, both waiting for news about loved ones. One reached over, not speaking, and gently covered the other's hand with her own. No names were exchanged. No promises made. Just silence, thick with understanding. Later, nurses noticed more of this. Touches that healed without medicine, eyes that held hope without flinching. "It's like the fear of being alone left us," one nurse whispered. "Now we're not afraid to sit in someone else's pain." Schools became places of wonder, not just work. A classroom in Oslo built a kindness garden, not with flowers, but with actions. Kids earned seeds for sharing supplies, calming a friend, or helping clean up. When the garden grew, a wall covered in painted paper leaves, they sent photos into space via amateur radio. "We're showing them what we're learning," a 10-year-old explained, taping up her leaf. That helping feels like sunlight. Even grief changed. When a community lost someone, neighbors didn't just bring casseroles. They gathered at dusk and hummed a dream melody, a low, warm sound that wrapped around the grieving family like a blanket. In New Orleans, after a musician passed, friends played his favorite songs in the street, not with tears, but with dancing. "He's part of the rhythm now," one said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We just keep the beat going." Technology didn't vanish, it softened. Social media feeds filled with small wonders. A video of raindrops on a leaf, timed to the heartbeat pulse. A child teaching her dog to shake hands in slow motion. An elderly couple slow dancing in their kitchen. Arguments didn't disappear, but they lost their bite. Online, someone would post, "Remember the Dawn Star?" and the fight would pause. People would take a breath. Try again. Then came the gardens. Not just community plots, but something new. Listening gardens. Quiet spaces in cities where you could sit without noise. In London, one was built on a forgotten railway platform. In Mumbai, a patch of concrete became a circle of sand and stones. People came to sit, not to talk, but to feel the earth under them and the sky above. A teenager in Detroit described it. You sit there, and the city noise fades. You hear your own breath, and you realize the universe isn't out there. It's right here in your chest. Scientists finally understood what the object had been. A mirror. Not showing what we were, but what we could be. The signals weren't lessons, it was us, reflected back at our best moments. The heartbeat they sent? It matched the rhythm of a mother rocking a sick child in Kenya, recorded by a passing aid worker years ago. The water purification method? Based on how indigenous tribes in Brazil had cleaned rivers for centuries. They weren't teaching us new things. They were honoring what we already knew but had forgotten. This hit hard. A factory owner in Mexico shut down his plant for a week. Workers used the time to build playgrounds for nearby schools. "We spent years chasing profit," he said, swinging on a new tire swing with his daughter. "Now we remember what really builds a future." In a refugee camp, people who'd lost everything began sharing their last scraps of fabric to sew quilts, not for warmth, but for beauty. "We make pretty things," one woman said, stitching a bright bird, "because we know someone is watching, and they see us as more than broken." The biggest shift was in how people saw themselves. No more, "I'm just one person." A street sweeper in Seoul started leaving tiny chalk drawings on sidewalks. Stars, hands, hearts. "Before," he said, wiping sweat, "I felt invisible. Now, I know my broom matters." Every stroke is a word in a letter to the stars. Kids stopped asking, "What do you want to be?" and started asking, "How do you want to make people feel?" One rainy afternoon, something simple happened that set it all. In a crowded bus in Bogota, a young woman dropped her bag. Papers scattered everywhere. Before, people might have stepped over them. But this time, hands reached down. Strangers knelt, sorting pages in the rain. No one rushed. No one complained. When the bus driver saw, he pulled over and waited. The woman kept saying thank you, but an older man just smiled. "We're all carrying each other's papers now," he said, handing her a damp sketch of a bird. "That's how it works." That night, the constellation pulsed, not with light, but with sound. A single, clear tone, like a bell made of wind. It played through radios, phones, even the hum of refrigerators. People stopped what they were doing, listened, smiled, went back to their lives, but carried the tone inside them. The next morning, the dawn star was still there, but so was everything else. The laundry still needed hanging. The crops still needed tending. The buses still ran late. Only now, people did these things like prayers, not because they expected rewards, but because they finally understood. The universe wasn't waiting for grand gestures. It was paying attention to how you treated the person beside you while waiting for the bus. How you planted seeds in hard soil. How you held space for someone else's silence. The real answer to "Are you there?" had never been in signals or stars. It was in the way a baker left extra bread for the homeless, the way a child shared her last apple, the way humanity, after 250 years of silence, finally learned to speak not with shouts, but with steady, everyday kindness. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.